Hoofstuk 23, Kruispad, Crossroads. Right, this is the last chapter, so let's see how it all ends up. Ouma Alice se vrolijke stem ruk my vanoggend wakker. Opstaan, opstaan! Dis tyd dat ons weer in die pad val. Met 'n kreun trek ek die duvet oor my kop. Toe nou, Luan, dit is amper 8 uur, sê sy. Oom Jackson het klaar ontbyt gemaak. Ek voel soos 'n zombie terwyl ek aantrek, maar ek kan nogtans nie help om te glimlag as ek terugdink aan gisteraand nie. Gelukkig is my ouma en oom Jackson se ore nie meer so goed nie. Die Land Rover se engine dreun harder as 'n weermag tanksin, maar hulle het dwars deur alles geslaap. Die huis was choepstil toe ek vanoggend skuins voor 2 uur ingesluip en die sleutels weer op hulle plek gehang het. Môre, sê groet oom Jackson toe ek in die kombuis kom. Môre oom, brom ek en gaap. En daardie vreeslike gaap, vra my ouma terwyl sy die brood uit die rooster haal. Sy het vanoggend 'n neonpers soetpak aan. 'n Mens sal sweer jy het eers 2 uur vanoggend in die bed gekom. Maybe she did know. Granny Alice's cheery voice woke him up that morning. She said, get up, it's time that we hit the road again. With a groan, Luan pulled the duvet over his head. Come on, Luan, she said, it's almost 8 o'clock. Oom Jackson has already made breakfast. He feels like a zombie while he's getting dressed, but then he can't help smiling when he thinks about what happened the previous evening, or last night, or early this morning, probably. Fortunately, his Oma and Oom Jackson don't hear so well anymore, he thinks. The Land Rover's engine makes more noise than army tanks, but they seem to have slept through everything. The house was extremely quiet when he came back into the house at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he slipped in and he put the keys where they used to hang. Then Oom Jackson greets him when he walks into the kitchen. Hello, uncle, he grumbles while he's yawning And that terrible yawn, asked his gran, while she was taking bread out of the toaster. Or toast out of the toaster. You put bread in the toaster. And this morning she's wearing a neon purple tracksuit. So can you imagine? Luan's gran's wearing a neon purple tracksuit and she has red hair. That must be quite scary. But then she says that someone would swear that you only got into the house at 2 o'clock this morning. Jy sal moet laat kyk na daardie Landy se uitlaatstelsel, Alice, sê oom Jackson op sy gewone droë manier terwyl hy sy brood smeer. Ek is seker daar's iets fout, die ding lawaai vreeslik. 'n Mens kan dit tot wie weet waar hoor. My gesig word vuurwarm. Flip het, miskien is hulle ore nie heeltemal so sleg as wat ek gedink het nie. Koffie vir jou, Luan, vra ouma en knipoog vir my. Toe ons klaar geëet het, stap ek buitentoe. Dis 'n lekker oggend. Die son skyn helder en die ryp het klaar gesmelt. Ek stap kraal toe. Môre Dolores, groet ek, sy bler toe sy my sien. My foon vibreer in my sak. Ek glimlag toe ek sien dis 'n Instagram notification. Hi, jy's terug op die lug, sê ek vir Dolores. Depra Skape se profiel is weer aktief. Ouma kom uit die rigting van die huis gestap. Sy kom staan langs my en vryf oor Dolores se neus. Oom Jackson het aangebied dat sy vir 'n paar dae hier kan bly terwyl ons verder ry, sê sy. As dit oukei is met jou, ons sal weer hier langs verbykom en haar oplaai. Ek dink sy geniet die bokke se geselskap. Lana het gisteraand gesê, daar praat ek my mond verby. Ek bedoel sy het 'n boodskap gestuur om te sê 'n petting zoo in Bloem wil graag vir Dolores aanneem. Okay, so Uncle Jackson also says, Alice, you'll have to check the Landy's exhaust while Alice, in his kind of dry manner while he's busy buttering the bread. He says, I'm sure there's something wrong there. The thing is making a terrible noise. You can hear it all over the place. And Luan's face gets very hot. Flip it, maybe their hearing is not as bad as what he thought. And then his grand says, would you like some coffee, Luan? And she sort of winks at him. When they were finished eating, he went outside. It's a beautiful morning. The sun is shining and the frost has already melted. And he walks over to the kraal. And he greets Dolores, and Dolores bleats when she sees him. And then his phone vibrates in his pocket. And he smiles when he sees an Instagram notification. And he says, hey, Dolores, you're back online. And Atepra's sheep's profile has become active again. Oma comes walking from the direction of the house, and she stands next to Luan, and she rubs over Dolores' nose. And she says, Jackson has offered that Dolores can stay here for a few days while we continue our journey. If it's okay with you, and then we'll come back this way and pick her up when we're finished. And she says, I think the Dolores enjoys the goat's company. Lana yesterday said, and then he stops and he realizes that he's spoken or said too much. And he quickly changes his tune. He says, she sent a message to say that there's a petting zoo in Bloemfontein that would like to adopt Dolores. Dit klink goed, sê ouma. Hoe sal jy daarvan hou, Dolores? Hoope kinders wat jou geselskap kan hou en aandag aan jou kan gee. Dolores vat 'n groot hap lucerne en begin dit kou. As ek my verbeelding gebruik, lyk dit wraggies amper asof sy glimlag. Of dalk is dit nie my verbeelding nie. Hulle sê mos skape kan emosie wys. Ek slaan my arm om haar nek en neem 'n selfie saam met haar. Dankie, Dolores, fluister ek in haar oor toe ouma weggestap. As dit nie vir jou was nie, sou 'n meisie slaan en 2 keer na my kant toe gekyk het nie. Dolores gee 'n sug en kou verder. Halfuur later is die Land Rover gepak. My ouma en oom Jackson staan eenkant op die stoep en gesels. Dit lyk asof hulle 'n bietjie privaatheid sal waardeer. Ek gaan klim so lank in die Land Rover en stuur vir Lana die foto van my en Dolores aan. Sy antwoord amper dadelik. Ah, cutie, nie jy nie, die skaap. And then she does like a smiley face. Ons is op pad Williston toe. My pa het 'n klomp kilos om in te haal. Ouma Alice klim langs my in die Land Rover. Oom Jackson kom staan aan my kant en strek sy hand deur die ruit na my uit. Ek skud dit. Kyk mooi na jou ouma Luan, sê hy. Sy is enig in haar soort. So Grant says, oh, that sounds good. And she says to Dolores, how would you enjoy to have children keeping you company all day and touching you all the time? Or giving you attention all the time? Dolores takes a big bite of lucerne and starts to chew. And it might just be Luan's imagination, but it really looks like she's almost smiling. But maybe it's not just his imagination, because he read that sheep can show their emotions. He puts his arm around her neck and he takes a selfie with Dolores. And then he whispers to her, thanks, Dolores. If it wasn't for you, a girl like Lana wouldn't have looked twice in my direction. Dolores sighs and carries on chewing. Half an hour later, the Land Rover is packed and his Oma and Jackson are standing to one side on the stoop and they're talking. It seems to Leon as though they might want a bit of privacy. So he goes and he climbs into the Land Rover and he sends Lana the photo of him and Dolores. And she immediately answers and she says, oh, what a cutie. Not you, the sheep. And then she does a smiley face. She says, we're on the way to Williston. My dad has to catch up a whole lot of kilos today. Then Granny Alice climbs into the Land Rover next to him. Jackson comes around to his side, puts his hand through the window, and they shake hands. And Jackson says, please look after your gran. She is one of a kind. Kyk mooi na Dolores oom, sê ek. Sy is ook enig van haar soort. In haar soort. Top of page 128. Luan says, just please look after Dolores, uncle. She's also one of a kind. Die oom lag. Ek sal beloof hy. Sien julle weer oor 'n paar dae. O ja, en voor ek vergeet, hy haal 'n pakkie lekkers uit sy baadjie se binnesak en hou dit deur die venster na ouma toe. Dis mos jou gunsteling, sê hy. My ouma is amper 70, maar ek sweer sy bloos toe sy die pakkie jelly babies by hom vat. Die Land Rover se engine gee 'n opgewonde brul toe ouma Alice dit aanskakel. Dit klink of die geel gevaarte vanoggend uitsien na die pad wat nog voor lê. Ons waai toe ons by die plaashek uitry. My ouma kyk in die triespeeltjie en ek sien hoe sy onder haar oë vee. Wie sou kon dink dat my hartgebakte ouma so maklik kan huil? Ek hou van hom, sê sy. Ek hou van hom, sê ek. My ouma gee 'n tranerige lag. Ek ook, sê sy. Ons ry 'n ruk lank in stilte. Ouma Alice ry stadig. Ek lê met my kop agteroor teen die sitplek en hou die telefoonpale dop wat verby marseer. Windpomp, sê ek vir ouma en beduie na 'n windpomp voor in die pad. Sy ry stadiger. Weet jy, sê sy in gedagte, ek is nie seker of ek meer windpompe wil afneem nie. Wat? Vra ek verbaas. Maar hoekom nie? Ek dog dan dis hoekom ons al die pad hiernatoe gekom het. Sy trek van die pad af en draai na my toe. Dit was sommer net 'n verskoning. Die waarheid is, dit was tyd om jou oupa finaal te groet. 'n Mens kan ook nie vir ewig met iemand se as in 'n potjie op jou kachelrak saamleef nie. En ek moes dinge met oom Jackson uitpraat. Sorry, I've got to translate that previous section. So, he says to him, yeah, look after Laura, she's also one of a kind. And oom Jackson laughs and he says, I will, I promise you. And I'll see you guys in a few days' time. Oh yes, and before I forget, he takes out a packet of sweets from his jacket pocket and he gives it to Gran through the window. And he says, these are your favorite. And although his Gran is almost 70, Luan can swear that she blushed when she took the packet of jelly babies from oom Jackson. The Land Rover's engine gave an excited roar as Oma Alice switched it on. It sounds as though the yellow Dinge, which is a Land Rover, is really looking forward to hitting the road today. They waved when they went out the farm gate. And his Gran looked in the rearview mirror and he could see how she was kind of wiping under her eyes. And he says, who could have thought that my tough old granny would be able to cry so easily? And Luan says, I really like him. And Gran gives a sort of tearful laugh and she says, me too. They ride for a while in silence. Oma Alice is going quite slowly. And he puts his head back on the backrest of the seat. And he kind of keeps an eye on the telephone poles going past. Suddenly he shouts out, windmill! And he indicates a windmill near the road. And his Gran drives a bit slower and she says, you know, she's deep in thought and she says, I'm not sure if I really want to take pictures of any more windmills. What? Says Luan, surprised. But why not? I thought that's why we had come out here. This is the top of page 129, if you're still following. She says, she pulls off from the road and she turns to Luan and she says, you know, that was just an excuse. The truth is, it was time to say a final farewell to your grandfather. You can only live for so long with you can't live forever with someone's ashes on a mantelpiece over your fireplace. And I also need to sort things out with Uncle Jackson. Ek knik, dit maak sin, wel soort van. Met ouma Alice maak dinge nooit 100% sin nie. Dit het ek in 'n baie kort rukkie geleer. Ek het al maande terug jou ma en pa gevra of jy mag saamkom op hierdie trippie, sê sy. Dit was hoogtyd dat ek en jy mekaar beter leer ken. Ek sit verbaas op. Wat? Ek dog dan dit was my straf vir... Sy maak 'n gromgeluid. Glo my, hulle het eers ingestem nadat jy in die moeilikheid beland het. Ek hou jou en jou suster al van klein tyd af dop. Julle is immers my enigste 2 kleinkinders. Christel is jou pa se kind. En dalk is dit nie so 'n slegte ding nie, al erken ek dit nie maklik nie. Maar jy, sy glimlag en begin om Jackson se pakkie bont jelly lekkers oopmaak. Ek is bevrees jy aard so klein bietjie na jou ouma. Ek grinnig geskeep weg en grawe my selfoon uit my jeans sak. Gaan ouma omgee as ek gou iemand bel, vra ek. So just kind of after that first paragraph on page 129, Luan nods his head, a knik. It makes sense. Well, kind of these things. With his Gran, you're never really 100% sure. She doesn't really always make sense. This is what he's realized in the few days that he's been with her. But she said months ago, asked you and your mom and your dad, if I could take you with on this trip to get rid of the ashes and the trip in the Karoo. Because it was high time that we got to know each other better. This is his Gran and Luan. Luan sits up quite surprised. What? I thought it was my punishment for... then she grumbles and she says, no, believe me, they at first didn't agree until you actually got into trouble. They didn't agree for you to come with me. But I've been keeping an eye on you and your sister from when you were small. You are, after all, my only 2 grandchildren. And Christelle is your father's child. And that's not really a bad thing, even though I don't like to admit it, says Gran. But you... And she smiles and she takes out Worm Jackson's jelly babies and she opens the package and says, I'm afraid you are a lot like your Gran. He smiles skewly and digs out his cell phone from his jean pocket and he says, Gran, do you mind if I phone somebody? Sy skakel die Land Rover se engine af. She switched off the Land Rover's engine. Jackson het 'n fles met koffie ingepak, sê sy. Ek skink vir jou ook as jy klaar is. Ek klim uit en stap 'n end weg voor ek die eerste nommer skakel. Dit lei nie. Teleurgesteld laat ek die foon sak. Die syne swak, roep my ouma. Dis beter as 'n mens hoor is. Die windpomp, natuurlik. Ek klim deur die draad en stap tot by die windpomp. Die metaal van die leertjie is ijskoud onder my hande. Ek druk my selfoon terug in my sak en klim op. Toe ek bo kom, skuif ek versigtig tot op die houtplatform en toets dit met my boude. Dit voel darm redelik stewig. Ek haal weer my selfoon uit my sak, maar 'n rukkie lank bly ek net so sit. Hier van bo af voel dit asof ek tot aan die einde van die wêreld kan sien. Uiteindelik skakel ek die nommer. Hierdie keer lei dit. Luan, groet die stem aan die ander kant. Ek het gewonder wanneer jy weer van jou laat hoor. Sorry oor nou die dag, dude. Ek hoop ons is weer cool. Ek haal diep asem. Ryan, sê my net een ding, sê ek. Hoekom jy's meneer Karels se huis? Ryan lag onseker. Wat bedoel jy? Just like Luan. Ek dog jy het nou al relax oor die hele storie. Ek het jou mos gesê, alles is uitgesorteer. Jou pa... Okay, so, remember he wants to make a phone call, so Gran switches off the Land Rover's engine, and she says, Jackson has made us a flask of coffee, and I'll pour for you when you're finished phoning. Luan climbs out and walks a little way away, while he tries to phone the first number, but it's not ringing, and he's a little bit upset as he puts the phone down. And then his Gran says, hey, but the signal here is very weak. It's better if you're higher up. And then he realizes she's talking about the windmill. Obviously, he climbs through the fence and walks to the windmill. The metal of the ladder of the windmill is very cold under his hands. He puts his phone back in his pocket and he starts to climb up. When he gets to the top, he shifts carefully until he's gets to the wooden platform, and then he tests it first with his boulder. But it feels quite sturdy. So once again he takes his cell phone out of his pocket, but for a while he just sits like that. From the top here it feels as though you can see to the end of the world. Eventually he dials the number, or punches in the number on the cell phone. This time it rings. Luan, the voice comes from the other side. I wondered when I was going to hear from you again. Sorry about the other day, dude. I hope everything is cool. Luan takes a deep breath and he says, Ryan, you must tell me one thing. Why did we toilet paper Mr. Carl's house? Ryan laughs uncertainly and he says, oh, what do you mean? You sure? Just like, Luan, I thought you'd relaxed about the whole thing. And I already told you, your dad sorted everything out. Was dit regtig net 'n grap? Hoekom het jy sy huis gekies? Was it really just a joke? Why did you choose his house? Ryan bly stil. Ek begin dink hy het dalk die foon neergesit, maar toe begin praat. Maar toe hy begin praat, klink sy stem skielik heeltemal anders. Weet jy, Loukie, jy is besig om 'n regte pyn te word, sê hy. Dalk moet jy minder tyd saam met jou ouma spandeer. Maar as jy dan regtig moet weet, Coach Karelse dreig om my volgende kwartaal uit die cricketspan te smyt. Hy sê my kop is nie meer by die game nie, en ek jaag te veel aan by die skool. Weet jy wat sal my pa doen as ek uit die span gegooi word, Loukie? Hy sal flip, en my pa vreet nie soveel op soos jou pa nie. As hy flip, is dit nie mooi nie. Cricket is sy ding, hy het destyds provinsiaal gespeel. En joune, vra ek, is dit jou ding ook? Ek is die beste bloody speler in die span, roep hy uit. Ek weet dit, jy weet dit, en Karelse weet dit. Hy sal nie waag om my uit te gooi nie. Watch net. Maar ek wou hom anyway 'n bietjie skrik maak. Ek druk die foon dood. Ek wil nie meer hoor nie. Oor kan die pad stap ouma Alice rond met haar beker koffie in haar hand en haar kamera om haar nek. Maar haar pers sweetpak en haar rooi hare wat vanoggend ekstra parmantig in die lug staan, lyk soos die een of ander eksotiese voël wat in die middel van die vaal Karoo veld beland het. Was it really just a joke? Why did you pick his house? Asked Luan. The top of page 131. Ryan is quiet for a while. And Luan starts to think that maybe Ryan's put the phone down, but then he starts to talk, and his voice sounds completely different. He says, you know, little Loki, you're starting to become a real pain. Maybe you must spend a little bit less time with your gran. But if you really must know, Coach Carls had threatened to kick me out of the cricket team next term. He said that my head wasn't really in the game anymore, and that I'm getting on too much nonsense at school. But you know what my dad will do if I get kicked out of the team. He will flip. And my father doesn't take as much as your dad, he says to Luan. If he flips, it's not going to be pretty. Cricket is his thing. He used to play provincially. This is Ryan's dad. And yours? Asked Luan. What is your thing? And then Ryan says, you know, I'm the best bloody player in the team. He shouts out. And you know, you and Carl also know it. He wouldn't dare to kick me out of the team. Just watch. But anyway, I wanted to scare him a bit. And that's when Luan shuts the phone down. He doesn't want to hear any more from Ryan. And across the road, he notices Oma Alice walking around with a coffee mug in her hand and the camera around her neck. With her purple tracksuit and her red hair, which looks even more exotic this morning, she looks a bit like some kind of exotic bird that's landed in the middle of the crew. I told you she must look really bright. Ek byt my onderlip en soek die volgende naam op my foon. Luan? Aan sy stem kan ek dadelik hoor, hy dink iets is fout. Hallo pa, ek haal diep asem. Waar is jy? Is iets fout? Ek glimlag. Wel, ek kan hom seker nie kwalik neem nie. Die afgelope tyd was ek in genoeg moeilikheid. Gelukkig het my ouma besluit, dis beter om as ons niks oor gister se drama sê nie. As 'n mens 14 is, hoef jou pa regtig ook nie meer alles te weet nie, het sy met 'n knipoog gesê. Ek is in 'n windpomp iewers langs 'n teerpad in die Karoo, sê ek vir my pa. Alles is reg. O, ek is bly. Pa, ek huiwer 'n oomblik. Ek wil net sê 'n jammer oor alles en ek wil iets vra. Wat is dit, Luan? Sy stem verander van verlig na agterdogtig. Die moeilikheid by die skool. Kan ek dit asseblief self uitsorteer wanneer die nuwe kwartaal begin? Ek sal met die hoof en meneer Karelse gaan praat. My pa sug. Ek dink nie jy verstaan in hoeveel moeilikheid julle is nie, Luan. Dit is nie 'n klein dingetjie nie. Dit gaan nie sommer van self weggaan nie. So he bites his lip and he dials the next number that he wants to phone. And the voice answers, Luan, And from the sound of the voice, he can clearly hear that something is wrong. And he says, "Hello, Dad." And then he takes a breath. His dad says, "Where are you? What's wrong? Or is something wrong?" Luan just smiles. Well, he knows better than to... he can't really blame his dad. The last while he has been in quite a lot of trouble. But fortunately his grand decided that they don't need to tell his dad about the drama of the previous day with the sheep. Because she says, when you're 14, your dad really doesn't have to know everything that you get up to. And she said that with a wink. And Luan says, I'm on top of a windmill somewhere near a tar road in the Karoo, and everything is fine. And his dad says, "Oh, I'm happy." And then he says, "Dad," and he kind of hesitates for a moment. And he says, "I'm sorry about everything, and I want to ask you something." And his dad says, "What is it, Luan?" And his voice changes from one of relief to one of suspicion. And he says, "The trouble at the school, can I please sort it out myself when the new term begins? I will speak to the principal and Mr. Carlson." His dad sighs and he says, "I don't think you understand how much trouble you guys are in, Luan. It's not a small thing. It's not just going to go away by itself." "Ek gee nie om nie, pa. Dis okay as hulle my wil skors. Maar ek gaan die waarheid vertel oor wat daardie aand gebeur het. Ek gaan nie toelaat dat Div alleen die skuld kry nie." Ek sweer ek kan hoor hoe hy op sy horlosie kyk. "Luister, Luan, ek moet gaan. Hier is 'n kliënt, ons praat weer." "Dit is nie nodig nie, pa," sê ek. "Ek het klaar besluit." My stem klink verbasend kalm. My eie weergawe van kaptein klaar gepraat. Ek druk die foon dood. Alles is stil. My vingers is lomp van die koue terwyl ek 'n boodskap tik. "Ek gaan die waarheid vertel oor wat gebeur het. Ek dink jy moet ook. Ek stuur dit vir Div." "Luan, jou koffie word koud," roep ouma. Voor ek myself kan kry, glimlag ek breed. Ek stuur vinnig vir Lana 3 kruisies op WhatsApp. Dalk kan ek hols op my foon aflaai, dink ek terwyl ek ondertoe klouter. Ek kan nie wag om dit te lees nie. Ouma wag my met 'n beker koffie in. Sy maak haar op die Land Rover se trappies tuis. "So," sê sy. "So," vra ek. Sy trek haar skouers op. "Ons het 'n tank vol diesel. Ons het 'n paar dae. Ons kan vanaand oorslaap net waar ons wil." He says that, top of page 133, "I really don't care. It's okay if they want to expel me. But I'm going to tell the truth about what happened that night. I'm not going to allow Div to take the blame alone." And he swears he can hear his father looking at his watch when his father says, "Listen, Luan, I must go. Here's a client. We'll speak again." And then Luan says, "No, it's not necessary, Dad. I have already decided." And his voice sounds quite calm, surprisingly enough. His own version of Captain finished talking. And he pushes the red button to kill the phone call. Everything is dead quiet. His fingers are feeling a little bit clumsy from the cold while he types out a message. And he types a message. The message says, "I'm going to tell the truth about what happened, and I think you must also." And he sends that off to Div. Then his grand calls him and says, "Your coffee's getting cold." Before he finds himself, he's smiling broadly, and he quickly sends Lana 3 crosses on WhatsApp. Maybe he can download holes onto his phone, he thinks while he's climbing down. He can't wait to read it. Oma's waiting for him with a mug of coffee. She makes herself at home on the Land Rover's little step, and so she says, "So?" And he says, "So?" We ask, "So?" She shrugs her shoulders. "So we've got a tank full of diesel, and we've got a few days. Tonight we can sleep wherever we want to. Hier is oorgenoeg windpompe as ek besluit ek wil nog van hulle afneem." Ek vat 'n sluk van oom Jackson se sterk bitter koffie en kyk na die teerpad wat voor ons uitstrek. "Cool," sê ek. Hoe ver is Williston hier vandaan af? So Grant says there are more than enough windmills if I decide I want to take some more windmill pictures. Luan takes a sip of Jackson's strong bitter coffee and looks at the tar road that stretches out in front of them. Cool, he says. How far is Williston from here?